Irashaimase. Hello and welcome to Fataris' Kitchen. I'm your host, Chef Fataris. It's time once again for Shoot 'em Up Saturday, and on the menu this week we have The Night Witch, a twin-stick Metroidvania. What kind of taste will it have? Let's get cooking and find out. From developer Super Awesome Hyperdimensional Mega Team and publisher Team 17, The Night Witch released in late November 2022 for the PC, the Xbox, the PlayStation 4 and 5, and the Nintendo Switch. And today we're looking at the Nintendo Switch version of the title. So this is one that I am mixed with my time with so far. The game has a lot of great promise. The concept is awesome. However, I do feel there's some executional flaws that ruined my enjoyment to the point where there was one night I was just frustrated enough, I put the controller down and had to play something else. So it's one that if you're looking for a more challenging Metroidvania that has some decent story to it, then this might be one to check out. But for the most part, I don't think this is going to be everyone's cup of tea. So with that said, let's dive into the game. You can kind of see for yourself what it has to offer. Here we find ourselves at the beginning of the tutorial. I figured this would be a good place to show off the game and kind of give you a feel for what it has to offer. So we play as the character Robin, at least in this section, a night witch who's fighting against an evil empire that's ruined the planet, basically draining the planet of all of its resources. There are several other night witches that we're working with to defeat these enemies, and so we can see already that there's some pretty decent shoot 'em up mechanics here. So as far as movement is concerned, this left stick, the shooting with the right stick is a little bit interesting. So you've got two options. You can either control your aim manually, or if you just press the fire button, it will auto lock on to enemies that are within range, which in certain situations can be very helpful. There are times where you have to focus more on dodging than actually worrying about where you're putting your shots. So throughout the course of this, there's a fair bit of story, and that's one of the game's strengths, I feel, is it has a pretty decent story overall. So if you're interested in a nice story, then this is one that I could recommend off of that particular reason alone. So in addition to our shot, which is and our movement with the twin stick controls, we have a couple other options for attacking and movement in general. So we have a dash, and the dash itself does act to move us through enemy shots, as well as later in the game it does act to also move us around certain barriers. And then we also have these really cute kitty throughout the course of the game. No, the kitty is just a little bit of a joke, but you do see a lot of that kitty, unfortunately, and I'll get to that in just a moment. We also have all these spell cards. So throughout the course of defeating the enemies, sometimes they'll drop these blue orbs, and those fill up our mana in the bottom right. Those mana will power these various spell cards, as they're called, and those spell cards are what we can use to more efficiently take out enemies. We set up a deck, and then the spell cards are pulled from that deck randomly, so it's a pretty interesting mechanic that way. So you want to go and fill your deck with attacks that are really helpful, but you can go and use without too high of cost. So here we find ourselves against our first boss, and one thing that I find is interesting is the game doesn't pull punches even in the tutorial. The first couple times I died on this boss, the first couple times I played it, I died on this boss multiple times and had to reset. So just know that this game is going to challenge you, and that's one of the things that I do have a little bit of a complaint with. So here we've chosen to use the spell card for our hand cannon, which is a more powered up shot, but the weapons that you upgrade to are temporary most of the time. There is the ability to turn on some cheat codes, and that's yet another thing that we'll get to here in a little bit. I do have to be careful with this fight though, as I only have 2 hits left. Really, the way that it's best in this fight is pull back, make your shots, then once there's a lot of the mana orbs like on the stage. You move in there to grab those so we can ultimately like deal the damage you need to defeat this boss. Just a little bit more, and down. And that's the tutorial. It goes into a bit more of a story, and then we jump to the character that we play the rest of the game as. So after you begin the main game, we're introduced to our actual main character, Rain. So Rain is basically a night witch who was, well, a failed night witch. She wasn't able to fight along her sisters in like the original war, the one that's we're fighting in the tutorial, but now fast forward 14 years later, and we've got like these events going on where this underground city that everybody's been forced to live in is under attack. So as far as abilities are concerned, Rain actually starts off a little weaker than Robin, but throughout the course of your adventures, you gain abilities that will go and put you on par and eventually exceed Robin and her abilities, provided you get all the abilities. And at this point, I'm sure there's several that I'm missing. If you pull up the start screen, there's a few things you can look at. So there is a really nice map for all the various areas you can explore. In addition to that, we have our card collection. So these are all the various like spell cards I've collected. You can see that there's all these different counters for each one, and the loadout that I've selected below. In addition to that, we also have the link. So the link is basically your leveling system, and it works through interacting with characters throughout the course of the game. You gain abilities and like power leveling like your character, so you can like have special abilities with the various characters you interact with, as well as upgrades, so like bullet damage plus 40%, bullet rate of fire plus 40%, etc, etc. And the levels are on two sides. We've got the knight side and the witch side, which is kind of interesting, but it does force you to choose what direction you want to build your character. And lastly, there is also an inventory as well, and here you can see what you've collected, but this is largely just giving you an idea of like what you've like seen throughout the course of the game. So as far as abilities are concerned, like I said, she's like still like largely the same as Robin, especially with a little bit of leveling, but there's also something else. So at the moment, I've got a couple cheat modifiers turned on, and as I was mentioning, the game was getting to the point where I was so frustrated with it that in order to progress and ultimately finish the game, I had to turn on several of the built-in cheats, just so I didn't like walk away absolutely hating the game. So before I go and show you those, I do want to go and talk about these cute little guys. So throughout the course of the game, there's these skeletons that ultimately like work for this character called the Underbaker. They run this like these mobile cupcake shops where you can buy cupcakes to refill your health, but they also bake you armor. They're like single use, so once the armor takes like a hit, they'll ultimately break. But it's a pretty cute little like element of the game itself. Anyway, so the cheats are available in the start menu under the options. So if you go to your cheat menu, these are actually all question marks at the beginning, so you actually have to unlock the codes themselves, and you can find these online easily enough by just searching Night Witch cheats. And these are the various like cheats you can like have. So right now I've got invulnerability, unlimited mana, unlimited weapon durability, and slower enemy bullets turned on, just so I could like more thoroughly enjoy the game itself. As there was just a point where I had it with some of the gameplay. It was pretty enjoyable up to a point, but there was one point that I just got so frustrated that I just had to set it down, and then when I came back to it, it's like, you know, I'm going to go and use those cheats. So there do appear to be some bugs as well. So these enemies here, I believe those are boomerangs it's supposed to be throwing at me, but they don't actually go anywhere. They just spin. And there are a couple other like bugs throughout the course of the game that I've encountered. A couple like ambush encounters where not all the enemies spawn, so I wasn't able to finish it and I had to reset. Things like that. But for the most part, the game is relatively like stable. With that said, I'll take a quick moment to go and show you one of the parts that frustrated me the most with it. So here we have the map of the various areas that you can go to in the world, and there's one specific area, the Mirror Lake, that is the most frustrating. Like, as many of you as gamers would know, one of the most frustrating type of levels is water levels, and unfortunately this one is no exception. Here we find ourselves at the Mirror Lake. So as you first move through into the next map, we see for one thing there's water here, and at least with the abilities I've obtained, it's not possible for rain to move into the water. So what do you have for underwater movement? These pods put you into this submarine, and good lordy, this thing is just utterly frustrating to control. So the submarine pod, let's see if we can get to a decent section to go and show it off. The submarine pod has a faster rate of fire than Rain's own shot, but one problem is you can only go and shoot left and right. This ultimately works as quite the conundrum, as you'll have all these situations where you're looking to shoot enemies above or below, and you can't. And so we can shoot left, and if you need to shoot the other direction, you actually have to stop firing to turn the sub around. Those enemies above the water, we can't go and touch them, and they're throwing out so many shots. In addition to that, this is the third major area of the game, and they've got those torpedo shields around them. You don't have the rate of fire to go and really deal with those fishy torpedoes. The game just seems to ramp up in such a way that it's not very well balanced. So the part that was frustrating me so much on this is there were a couple sections where there was ambushes where you have to get through them in the sub, and I was just had it with those sections to the point where I ultimately had to set the game aside and come back to it the next day. In addition to that, let's talk a little bit about performance. So one thing that is an issue with the Night Witch, at least on the Nintendo Switch, is loading times are abysmal. The loading times, I would say, are long enough that you could easily get yourself a drink, and it's almost make yourself a sandwich tier bad. I don't know if this is the case on the other platforms. I would assume not as much so, but on the Nintendo Switch, at least be aware that's an issue. In addition to that, there are a couple areas where I feel that the frame rate is not all that great. So here's a good example of one of the areas I was super frustrated with. So we've got these turrets that are on the ground above us, and the only way to destroy them is by firing at these cannons that'll fire shots up. It's a very tricky system, and one that ultimately will result in you getting just as hurt as anything else. In addition to that, it's also possible for these shots that you're firing to also hit your ship, thus dealing more damage. At any rate, so that was this is the stage that I had the most frustration with in the Night Witch. The rest of it was alright, save for just some of the crazy difficulty curves that I just feel your character growth can't match. So, as far as the minus flavors are concerned, so the biggest one I've got is performance for the Nintendo Switch, at least. The loading time isn't great. You've also got problems with the slowdown, and a little less of an issue, but the character movement is pretty slow. It's possible that I've missed a power up that would affect that, but there is that. There's the issue with game scaling, where it feels like the game gets more difficult than you're really ready for. And that's one of the things that I kind of feel is just a cardinal sin for this type of a game. So in addition to character movement and other issues along those lines, one of the areas that also I feel is kind of a problem is there's no easy movement throughout the course of the game. So especially playing the Switch version, loading time is an issue, so you're going to be taking a while to get to another area regardless. And it takes, like, although the individual maps don't have any like loading in them, when you transition between them, like I said, the loading time is horrendous. So it would have been like nice to save you the time by giving you the ability to do some fast travel. If nothing else, there are these like basically healing / restorative points called like beacons. It would have been great if you could have at least fast traveled between those beacons on a map, but unfortunately there's no options like that in the game itself. But on the plus side, one of the things that I can say is the game itself is absolutely beautiful. The character designs are wonderful, the background art is very impressive, and you also have some neat character and, or rather some neat enemy designs as well. And some of the boss fights are like very, very solid shoot 'em up boss fights. But with the kit that you're given here, they will be challenging. And the game itself is just a great concept with just some flawed execution. So it's not one that I can give a solid recommendation to, unfortunately, but it might be one that if you're looking for a challenging Metroidvania that's also a shoot 'em up, then maybe this one might be worth a look. Alright, that'll just about wrap it up for this week's episode of Shoot 'em Up Saturday. As always, I want to thank you so much for joining us this week. I hope you have a wonderful week yourself, and we'll see you next time.